A reading from 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. And from the Gospel of John, chapter 15. I am the true vine, and God is the vine grower, who cuts off every branch in me that doesn't bear fruit, but prunes the fruitful ones to increase their yield. You've been pruned already, thanks to the word that I have spoken to you. Live on in me as I do in you. Just as a branch cannot bear fruit of itself apart from the vine, neither can you bear fruit apart from me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who live in me and I in them will bear abundant fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Today we continue our worship series, Every Story's a God Story. We're exploring story because storytelling has been an important teaching tool throughout human history. We tend to understand and remember information when we receive it as a narrative. Most people of all ages engage with stories in their own ways, whether it's Sweet Baby James, or the movie Nomadland, maybe Dr. Seuss. Perhaps Story for You takes the form of a podcast like Moth Story Hour, or a soap opera, Days of Our Lives. As sands through the hourglass, so are the days of our lives. Jesus told stories to help people understand big concepts. And he must have been good at it because people listened to him. The stories he told are still around, some of them at least. They've endured because they involve people that the crowd could identify with. Kings, farmers, beggars. They were about activities that his listeners engaged in. Weddings and weeding and working. Bonus points for alliteration, please. He told stories about familiar elements of their lives. As we have often said, most of the stories attributed to Jesus in the Gospels were not written by people who had actually known Jesus. All the Gospels were written many years, decades, after Jesus' crucifixion. So the stories in the Gospels, all of them, have been handed down orally. Stories that start in an oral tradition naturally shift along the way. They evolve. They are retold in such a way to incorporate things like new realities and events as they occur. Stories shift naturally as they're told until someone writes them down. Once they're written, stories cease to evolve. The stories Jesus told often took the form of parables. A sower went out to sow. A man had 2 sons. A woman with 10 silver coins loses one. These parables that Jesus told, they are fictional stories. They might be short or long. They're stories that engaged his listeners in a familiar experience, but they always had a twist thrown in that left people scratching their heads. Chances are the premises, the settings of these parables are less familiar to us, but they were very familiar and relatable to his listeners. And Jesus used metaphor extensively, comparing God to a boss, a judge, a shepherd, a farmer, or a gardener. In our gospel story today, God is a pruner, lovingly attending the vine, snipping out the bad parts of the branches and tossing them aside. We read further, we read that the dead branches are cast aside and then burned up in the fire. I don't know how that image hits you, but it's a bit problematic for me. I like God as farmer, seed planter. I get a little nervous when the story puts God in the vicinity of dangerous objects, sharp instruments, and fire. I wonder, how might God use a pruning shear on imperfect people, which of course is all of us? What exactly is it that gets burned up in the fire? What does that part of the story mean? And that's where my brain goes. My responses to the Bible are fueled by my past experience, the images of God that I have internalized from a conservative theology earlier in my life. Just like your responses, whatever they are informed by your experiences. That's just the way it works. In the Gospels, in the Bible in general, we do find images of an angry, vengeful God who is full of judgment, but not here. That's really not what this little story adds up to, because pruning, then and now, is an act of nurture. A gardener prunes in order to remove dead and dying branches. Pruning allows room for new growth. It helps a plant get strong enough to fight off harmful pests. Pruning helps a plant find its natural, beautiful shape. It helps it grow vigorously. Pruning done correctly is a process that brings life, not death. Of course, it can be done incorrectly. Our garden team recently planted close to 20 crepe myrtle trees on the church grounds, and I overheard the team talking to each other that you should never chop off the top of a crepe myrtle. If you just chop off the top, then it weakens the tree's immune response so that it can't fight off disease and insects as well. But in our story today, God is a pruner who knows what she's doing. The story is about a carefully tended vine that produces healthy growth. Skip ahead a few verses, and Jesus says, "As God has loved me, so I love you. Abide in my love. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." The pruner God does not evoke fear or expect fear. As we abide in God, abide in love, anything that is not love drops away. As Richard Rohr says, the people who know God well, mystics, hermits, prayerful people, those who risk everything to find God, they always meet a lover, not a dictator. This passage is a part of John's Gospel called the Farewell Discourse. It takes place immediately after the conclusion of the Last Supper, the night before his crucifixion. The Farewell Discourse is 3 chapters full of Jesus bestowing peace on his disciples and commanding them to love one another. In John's narrative, they didn't know what was going to happen next. These are words of comfort that they could recall after Jesus' death. In their grief, these words would remind them that they were still connected to Jesus, that he was not really gone, that he remained in reach. Well, more than in reach, really. He was as connected to them as a vine is to its branches. And we are too. It's a compelling image, isn't it? That we find life itself connected to a source, that we spring forth from a fullness that some of us call Christ. Connected as we are allows us to find our truest shape, our healthiest expression. It's a presence that sustains us, it feeds us. What's more, it sends us out, not like so many individuals separate and wandering, but like countless shoots that spring forth from the one vine. Friends, God the gardener is digging into the dirt. God, the universe, the pruner, is tending us, providing the conditions for us so that we can blossom into our natural, beautiful selves. New growth is springing forth from us. We rely on love that binds us, on love that tends us along the way. So nurtured and so rooted, may we abide in connection and leap forth in growth. Amen.